Chris from LaserLemon.com, and today Capcom is officially for sale, technically speaking, because Capcom shareholders have taken off the shackles from Capcom and are now open to a hostile takeover of the company. What does that mean? That means that they will no longer fight anybody that wanted to buy the company in court, not like, in a boxing ring. That means that they're hurting. That means that they're hurting, and they're finally hurting enough to admit that they could probably use a bigger brother to take care of them a little bit. So they're looking for a buyer. They're looking for somebody that wants to buy Capcom, and that is a big deal because if a first-party hardware company decided to buy Capcom, it could change the game. It could change the game quite a bit because although Capcom has been on the decline for several years, they still are the owners of some very, very, very valuable IP, such as Mega Man, such as Dead Rising, such as Street Fighter, and whoever owns that exclusively owns a big chunk of the gaming market, because where these games are, gamers go. Now, since Capcom has been a third-party company for all these years, gamers haven't had to choose like that, because if they bought an Xbox, they could get Street Fighter. If they bought a PlayStation, they could get Street Fighter. And the same thing goes with Mega Man on all these consoles, Wii U included, and it hasn't been a problem. But if Microsoft, Sony, or Nintendo decided that they want to put the money for it, they could own all that exclusively. And a lot of people would have to go exclusively to get those consoles. Now that's one possibility. You also have the possibility of another third party buying this company. So you could have EA buy Capcom. Now I don't think that they're necessarily going to make a Street Fighter 5, 6, 7, 8 happen just because they're EA. I think that they would probably let Capcom do their own thing because Capcom likes to milk the Street Fighter genre. Anyway, there's like a new version of Street Fighter 4 every year. At least. And I think EA could be down with that. Now, do I think that they really want to buy Capcom? No, EA isn't the same company that they were, I'd say, 8 years ago. Nope, they used to have a big vested interest in Ubisoft. I don't know if you remember that. But they bought a ton of chunks in Ubisoft, and they were looking to do a hostile takeover of that company. Ubisoft didn't like that. They pushed, and EA eventually backed down, and about a year or so back, EA just sold, I think, the remaining shares they had of Ubisoft. So that's probably not in EA's immediate radar. I don't think they're going to be doing that. They've scaled back a lot over the years. Now you have a company like Sega. I don't think anybody really expected Sega to be that big, heavy swinger when it came to buying big companies. But they did it with Atlas last year. It was a big deal. Atlas is a huge company in Japan. They put out some of the most popular games in that country. And there's a strong niche in America and Europe for their games too. So I say Sega is a possibility. And with that, you wouldn't have to worry about these games going exclusively to any one particular system. There's that. But let's move back to the first parties for a second. Who do I think could possibly buy Capcom? Well, you have Sony. And they're getting more back on top of their game in the console business. The PlayStation 4 is starting off a lot stronger than the PlayStation 3 did, and it's got a lot more favor over the Xbox One. There's that. But Sony as a company is also financially struggling quite a bit. I'd say much more badly than Capcom is. Sony is spread too thin. They've had to cut tons of divisions and really scale down. So while I could see Sony as a company really wanting to buy a company like Capcom because a lot of PlayStation gamers love the Capcom IP and would totally jump all over their games, regardless of whether they're exclusive, by the way. Even though that's the case, it doesn't sound like a smart move, at least for the short-term interests, because that's a lot of money Sony's just using to grab up another company that they don't necessarily know for sure is going to give them a lot of returns in the short term. And when it comes to a company that's a slave to their shareholders, such as Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, that's a risky move. because shareholders want to see those quick returns. They want to see that investment pump out the money quickly. They want their money, bitch. Now Microsoft, the American company that bought Rare, I could see them being interested in buying Capcom because Microsoft's footprint in Japan is next to nothing. They're sleeping with the fishes with the dead Italian over there. They're not doing well in Japan. And Capcom has a huge following in Japan. They have the IPs that Japan loves. And if these IPs were exclusive to Microsoft, God help me, I think Japan might actually get an Xbox One. If that was the only place they could play their Street Fighter, who knows? Who knows? So there's that. Microsoft, I could definitely see being a company that would go that direction because of all the companies, they could afford it more than anybody. It's just money to burn. However, Microsoft is also a slave to their shareholders, and a lot of their big shareholders over the last few years have been saying, sell the gaming company, sell the Xbox division. It's just been burning money for us. And Microsoft spending hundreds of millions of dollars on Capcom is just another example of them burning money on an investment that they don't necessarily know is going to pay off anytime soon. And the last time they did that with Rare, they totally gutted the company and fucking made no use of them. Rare is a shell of what they were when they were first bought out. They're not the same company anymore. And a lot of that is Microsoft's fault. A lot of that is Microsoft not knowing what to do with a big developer. And Capcom, I would argue, is much bigger than Rare was when they were bought out. So I don't know how that would work. I don't know how that would work, and I don't know that that would necessarily work at all. Now Nintendo. Nintendo has money in the bank. We all know this. Nintendo has been sitting on a lot of cash reserves, especially after the success of the Wii and the DS and the 3DS. They've been doing well. And now the Wii U is finally starting to pick up too. But that's another story. So Nintendo could afford Capcom. They could. They could definitely afford Capcom, at least a majority stake in Capcom, enough to make them a second party, exclusively making games for the Wii U and 3DS. They could do it. Now, will they do it? I would like to see them do it, because Nintendo has a history of taking a developer that wasn't a first-party company, taking them under their wing, and making them polish the shit out of their games. Nintendo has some great leaders in that company that really, they really push you. And companies that weren't known for making great games end up making really good games under Nintendo's watch. So they could. They could. I would like them to. But I don't necessarily think that they will. Because Nintendo, over the last few years, have outright stated that they're not so interested in big buyouts anymore. Because every time they used to do it, the talent would leave. Especially in Western companies. Capcom is not a Western company, but who knows, you know? They might want to go somewhere else. So Nintendo has been looking more towards the smaller developers like Next Level Games, the guys that made the Luigi's Mansion sequel. They like those guys. They like the smaller kind of developers because the talent often stays where they are. They want the IP, the famous IP, but they also want the people that made those games famous. And they don't necessarily know that they're going to get that by getting a huge developer like Capcom. That's a lot of responsibility Nintendo would suddenly have to have. And the same applies to all three of those first-party companies. So I would personally like to see it. If it's not Nintendo, I'd personally prefer a third-party company. It's probably more ideal for everybody if it was a third-party company, a neutral third-party company that bought Capcom. But that's my thoughts. I'd like to know your thoughts in the comments section below. Do you think that Capcom should even be bought? If you think a first party should buy Capcom, who do you think it should be and why? Please give a good reason. And if you think it should be a third party company, who do you think it should be and why? Let me know in the comments section below. Check out laserlemming.com and some of our other videos and articles. Got a comedy channel too. You should check that out. Subscribe for more. See you in the next one.